You absolutely punish companies that provide you a bad service or a bad product by not returning your business to them in the future.
Sure.
Like the
And what is it? Something like 65% of people will abandon a company completely if they have one bad experience. Like it's wild to see the level of.
and that's why those companies and those contact center agents do their very best to tolerate you even when you're being absolute scum. But like, remember, the agent is not at fault. They're just
Right.
there trying to help you.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Deep Learning with PolyAI, the only podcast that is spooky. I'm just kidding. You're probably hearing a lot of spooky stuff coming in because it is the start of spooky season. I'm your host, Damien, and I'm here with, as usual, Nikola Mrkšić, CEO and co-founder of PolyAI. Hey, Nikola.
Hey, Damien, how's it going?
Not too bad at all. As mentioned, we're entering sort of the Halloween era, which also serves as the entree. I've actually seen at a few retail locations some Christmas decor that's going up as well. So
Look, I mean, I basically look like Harry Potter with this, like, have scars.
is that your costume this year? That's awesome.
No, to prove that I'm still an adolescent.
We all are at heart, especially here on Deep Learning with PolyAI. But I did think that this was a good opportunity to talk about two things. One, some scary stories that are coming out of contact centers with regards to what is being reported as a pretty significant uptick in aggressive consumer behavior going toward human agents. People are having shorter tempers, having quicker expectations for resolution, and that's being reflected in, for lack of better words, a bunch of Karens calling into contact centers. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, and we anticipate that as we approach the holiday season, it's going to get worse and worse, why it happens, and more importantly, what you're hearing from some of our clients and just leaders of contact centers around the world with regards to how automation is possibly offsetting that by providing what you termed in a recent Total Retail article, AI armor, which is automation as a protective layer against, that sort of abuse hitting human agents in the contact center. So first and foremost, happy almost Halloween. Do you have any scary stories that you've heard from some of our clients or customers, or even something that you've experienced recently that would kind of call out to that theme?
Yeah, I mean, different things are scary to different groups here, right? One thing that really got to me when we started visiting contact centers, because we used to work on voice assistants going to consumer context, right? Where a double-digit percentage of calls, interactions with Google Assistant, Siri, Alexa involve profanities, right? Whether it's because people are frustrated or just because people are fooling around. But that's a high number, right? But what really surprised me when I went to just shadow human agents talking to contact center agents, to call show, just contact center interactions, right? Where people were like taking calls and dialing in because of a problem with a device they bought or a delay of a shipment or something like that. I was shocked just by how rude, maybe not the average person, but maybe a quarter of them were.
Really?
When flat out just like, I mean, they're pissed off. They're calling because there's been an issue with a service or a product or with delivery, but how like the contact center is just like that extension of the company that's there to like take that hit immediately. Like I was shocked with the percentage. I could not do the job, right? Like the reality of being a contact center agent is that people are yelling at you, they're complaining that the moment they can't do something with you, they're like going on aggressive rants. And some people do it very deliberately, right? Because they know that you might give them a refund or you might
Right. The squeaky wheel kind of
well, yeah,
approach.
you might give them a credit to make sure that they don't churn. It might be encoded in your rules, right? If you're a utility or a telco, right? And then, like from that point onwards, I was like, well, this is, when people talk about automating a job, I think that many contact center agent would love to not have to have that interaction, right?
Right.
The real issue is you don't know which ones they are, right? So it's not like you can selectively say, hey, Damien, giving off a pretty negative energy today. Maybe we leave him in an AI conversation for longer, right? But I think many would do that if they could, right? Now, we can't do that just yet, but what we can do is just, create a layer around the contact center.
Yeah.
To, absorb the first hit, right? Hopefully deal with as many calls automatically as possible. And, season matters, right? So like high retail season, like from Black Friday onwards, right? Uh, it gets hairy because the number of calls grows sometimes by a factor of 10. And
Yeah.
then companies staff up. There are a lot of part-time people, temporary workers there. The average
And those folks aren't coming in like,
Sure.
hell-bent on protecting brand. They're not coming in on being entrenched in corporate culture or whatever. They're coming in to sort of absorb the blows and to serve as that front line. And
Well, they
that's
just
that's
haven't
really
had the
not
time.
fair in an already grueling job.
I mean, they haven't had the time to learn, right?
Right.
Like, the attrition is already high, but, like, when you triple the size of your contact center with temporary staff, like, your quality of service inevitably degrades,
It has to.
and then your callers get more aggressive because maybe they're calling for the second time, third
Right.
time, right?
Or they've been on hold for quite some time. It's interesting though,
Absolutely.
when you think about the history of just the utility of a contact center, it probably in its advent, it was, okay, yes, we want to provide customer service. But then as it became the predominant channel for customer service and volume began to outstretch the capabilities and bandwidth, right? Then it becomes a deflection agent. It becomes how can we get people off of the phone, regardless of whether or not we provide any resolution to their issue. How do we make things as complicated for them so that they end up hanging up the phone? And that becomes like almost a pursuit. And it seems sort of counterintuitive. We're past that era now. And the good news is that we have the capabilities to sort of offset that increasing volume while still dealing with a fixed staff size. Is that fair?
Well, look, I mean, we have more capabilities. I think that when it comes to user behavior, right? Like, you said it, right? And it's been, I think, happening for 2 decades now, where just, like, companies are competing by providing a better service.
Right.
So they're trying to get to, and people expect a high level of service. So, and they are given, leave to behave in any way they want, right? Because companies are fighting for their business. So,
Which is a shame. We need to be better people as
absolutely,
consumers.
absolutely. But, like, if you were applying for a mortgage and then you start being unpleasant, I'm not going to hang up on you, right?
Right.
Whereas
That's true.
if I did, you would probably go to a different bank, right? So, especially in businesses where the service is somewhat commoditized, like, you don't really have enough. Think of like utilities, telcos, especially, right?
Yep.
Like, they will compete on service and they will compete to have you stay, right? So I think that, the one thing we can do is create like an instant pickup, deal with a lot of issues automatically in a uniform way, toe the line, right? And then hand off to a human who is ready to take the call and equipped, right? And with enough preparation, context, etc. If you increase first call resolution, people are happier. You basically, like, you're just lowering the blood pressure of the whole contact center by giving time back, by giving the right people enough time to deal with those complex queries,
Right.
and we're not leaving people to wait for too long. But what's interesting? Like, I moved about 2 months ago,
Okay.
and I picked the broadband provider that promised to get me uh, the earliest installation, right? And then just magically changed the date to 2 weeks later. And obviously, I wasn't particularly happy. And knowing what I know about the contact centers, I called and called and called. And very quickly, it became apparent that the answer I was getting, which was that the engineer needs to check the outside of the house and then something will have. Basically, like, I called enough times to figure out the journey. And
Yeah.
it turned out that they were just basically like giving me a generic answer that would get me to stop calling, and that their process would
So
proceed.
they're still stuck in the deflection era.
They're absolutely deflecting. And then I was like, I usually, especially having shot so many contact center agents, I don't like to be that caller, right?
Right.
Um, but I was like, hey, okay, like, if you contact us that change in the CRM to write that thing down for the team visiting, um, can I please speak to your manager? Right? Can I speak? And basically, I'm asking for a tier 2 agent,
Right.
like
Right.
someone
Right.
with a greater level of access,
A
right?
basic escalation request.
Yeah, I literally, it's the only time in my life that I've done it in a call like that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You do it often?
I don't really do it often because I think I explore every other venue before I tend to pick up and make a phone call.
Really?
That's just my way. Yeah. There's some things that I have to, especially those either high margin things like the worst and necessary customer experience that I had in the past was calling in about home insurance. And so
Mhm.
it was something that I couldn't handle online. I
Yeah.
had to talk with an agent. And it was a very similar experience to this. So I got pretty frustrated, but I didn't mean to interrupt. Continue.
Yeah, yeah, no, no. But what happened there was, I was placed on hold for 30 minutes. Went back to the same person. I said, "Hey, well, they're still on a phone call. That might be one mighty phone call. I hope they're
Yes.
takes a little." Um, and then I realized, and I've since spoken to a few of our clients, just kind of like protect the conversation. What really happened there? What do you think, right? And from people, heard is it's deliberately designed. Like you're not going to go through,
Right.
right? Because they have a playbook of like when and what and how, right? And then if you ask for that, well, they're just gonna leave you on hold. They'll make sure that you just like fizzle out, right? And yeah, you're spending someone's time, but if they escalated me to an engineer, that would be a lot more expensive, right? And they'd probably have a very complicated equation of my lifetime value as a customer and what the probability that I churn is relative to not meeting that request. And there I was, right? Um, they so it's interesting. I think that companies already have policies in place to somewhat protect both the people and just to manage the whole thing and manage the cost of the whole thing. But yeah, I think in the call we played initially, you hear different people, right? And I think that there's like aggression towards automation, but there's also just like aggression with humans. And I think what is really interesting about AI conversations, if people know that it's AI, and they tend to know even when it's really human-like, is that they don't try to manipulate AI as much, right? So whereas I might be giving you a sob story of why I really need internet right now, right? How I work
Right.
from home and mm, my kid's at home because he has a cold or something, whatever, right? Like the AI is like, okay,
I do
like
not care.
one of these things. Well, I
Right.
mean, AI can actually listen. It can change its tone. Right? We have systems where our agents change tones when they're dealing with a bereavement situation,
Right. Right. Right.
loss of a loved one or something like that. We can do a really good job there, but that's just the surface thing. And um, as a colleague of mine likes to say, like service is often about saying no several times in very pleasant ways and explaining why the answer is no, right? You can't always meet that request. And uh, when you can decipher which of your calls are those kinds of like complaints, and they fall in that quadrant of calls that don't do much for the caller or
Yeah.
much for your business. They're neither sales calls, nor are they like essential support calls where you can do something about it.
Right.
That's a good place to put AI, right? Because to be really honest, those calls should not exist, right? They're not
That's
adding.
true. But that's where
And
that AI armor comes into play, whereas it's a protective layer because honestly, if 90% of the calls or let's say 80% of the calls that come in are these rote routine, like intermediary, you can't apply a
yeah,
certain touch that will preserve that person's brand loyalty or anything like that.
absolutely. And just to give you an example, right? Like if you call and call and call, and an agent tells you something, right? And you keep pressing, 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 and they're really um, trying to, explain something to you. Maybe they don't have the right answer. Maybe they express themselves clumsily, but then you press on, like a lawyer, and you're like, but you said that, and you said that, and you said that.
Right.
Like, maybe like offered something that they have to go back on. And the calls are recorded. So if people want to press it, they can, right? This is where AI is, again, um, really principled, right? It's like a good lawyer. It will not do the wrong thing, right? If programmed
Right.
the right way. It's similar to, I think we had an article a while back about security and kind of like what voice assistants can, like, it's harder to manipulate them because they can have very
Yes.
hard-coded rules
Very true.
around getting tricked, right? And like, when to make an exception in a special situation. Similarly here, right? Even if someone's adamant to really just press on and on and on, with AI, they're a bit less likely to. And B, they're not really gonna catch you off guard in the same way because, you know, the thing is programmed to be very explicit in how it phrases certain things, right?
Sure.
So yeah, and again, like you have data and analytics from all that, so you know what people are calling. You can see where they're pressing, and it's just a good, frankly.
Which
And
would be harder to get from a human agent who got rattled by, the umpteenth upset customer that calls up because they had to wait 45 minutes and the sort of post-call analytics are not probably as clean if you're dealing with Assuming there's a manual process in place and there's not things like, calling
Yeah, I
IT
mean, and
things
humans
nuts.
get rattled and then they quit, right?
Right.
And
Right.
then your service gets even worse because you don't have
Yeah.
enough people, right? And it's just like, you know, slippery slope to oblivion all the way until the end of the Christmas season, right? Um,
But I mean, and speaking of the retail, I want to touch on that in just a sec, but it harkens back to the sense of appreciation that I've heard from a few of our particular customers. But I think who are always keen on systems or technologies or processes that offer that layer of protection, and not just because dealing with churn in a high churn environment is something that's taxing on resources in general, but because I mean, people managers are still people managers and they want to see their people happy and succeed. And I think back to an earlier episode of the podcast in our conversation series where we talked to Brian Jepson over at Fertitta
mhm.
Entertainment. And he mentioned about how, some of the employees were so thrilled because they were able to dedicate more of their call time to bonus generating activities, so affecting their
Yeah,
income as opposed to
absolutely. Yeah.
handling those routines, that they nominated the AI agent that was there, the Poly AI voice assistant that was in-house as an employee of the month because it was making their job a lot easier, by handling all of those.
Listen, we've had everything. We've had, cakes made with like, kind of anthropomorphic versions of the agent put on top when,
Oh, really?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like we've had like thank you notes. We've had like employee of the month awards for the agent. Um, People love it, right? Because it's just like it lowers the blood pressure, right? It
Right.
allows you to do more, right? And it gives you a lot. It gives agents a lot back and makes their lives better. Um, and yeah, I mean, and especially like it can also detect and quantify where customers are getting really angry, right? And that's something that feeds back into the ops, right? And says like, hey, look,
Very true.
there seems to be a spike in, you know, redelivery notices not being handed, right? Stuff like that, where if you just say, hey, we're aware of the problem, right? Like, then you can really get to the point that you are making the business better as a result, right? So over time, again, you further lower the blood pressure. And there's no overnight fix here, but, lower waiting times, more kind of like concrete answers that are always, you know, phrasing things the right way. It just like helps you get to a better outcome, right? And especially in these like high season kind of settings, it's a really
Right.
good way to not have your staff completely burn out and quit.
Very true. So, yet another stressor that we can help to remediate, or I think that people in general can help to remediate by just going into these peak seasons like the holidays and whatnot, and just be a little more jolly, be a little more holly jolly when you're talking to any person that you interact with, commercial or as otherwise. But we can't ignore the fact that like the holiday season is stressful overall. So I'm sure that these things are amplified. As a matter of fact, one of those studies that was quoted in the article that you submitted to Total Retail came from Ringover, and they reported that 90% of customer service staff reported an increase in abusive behavior,
Of course.
especially around this particular time of year, um, regarding the positive or previous year. So a 90% of customer support staff report an increase in abusive behavior year over year. Why why are we such animals when it comes to this stuff? And I really want to express a little bit more or dive in a little bit more about how you would think that if I had an automated agent on the phone that I would probably unleash a little bit more, but people are less aggressive to automation. Why is that?
I mean, the caveat is that the first turn, like of people screaming their heads off, is much worse with automation, right?
Okay.
People will try to get out of it any way they can. That's a big reason for why at PolyAI we spent tens of millions on better voices, on lower latency, on higher quality of understanding, so we can precisely relate to what you said rather than like reading you the
Right.
sentence, right? Um, just earning that right, the trust to stay in the conversation. So yeah, like the first thing, if it was a tennis match, you probably have, I don't know, who's the best on the tour. Uh, I don't know, pick a very tall, and I don't know, was Roddick? I don't know. My tennis knowledge fails me. But like the world's best servers on the other side, right? So like the thing starts and it's quite difficult, right? The caveat is that, those very tall tennis players that have an impossible serve, Evil Karlovic comes to mind, and a few others, right? Like, if you return, they're not as fast, right? And they're a bit clumsier. They're used to just winning the point when they serve, right? So if you stay in the point, you probably have a higher percentage chance of winning it. And the same is true for AI interactions in the contact center, where if you are able to like go back and forth a few times,
Yeah.
then the Russian really drops. People, oh, this works, okay. Then they get surprised, like they either like even compliment directly, right? But they figure out that they can use more than a yes, no, like refunds, right? And they start talking. They see that the system really picks up. Then it becomes a magical moment because everyone's hearing about AI all the time, right? And frankly, I don't think we're seeing enough of it just yet, not in daily lives, right?
Right. Sure.
Like, I wonder what percentage of the global population is aware of just, the recent jump in performance um, of GPT. Like, I really wonder how many people are aware of it and can actually like figure out that like O1A is like what it is. So I think when people like are on the phone and they realize that it's right, then they start asking questions, they go on tangents, they have a bit of fun with it, but also like they're bought back in. And then like the anger is just they're they're in a completely different mental state, right? Because
Right.
now I'm talking with like better AI than I've ever spoken to before, right? And that's
And that could be like, why do they
it's a
come
new
in so hot?
experience. Like,
Yeah, I mean, it must be, and it probably is. And there's that level of amazement too that probably tempers that anger a little bit quicker.
absolutely, you
Oh
get
wow,
distracted away from being angry, right?
yeah, that's a really interesting
And
point.
if you're hyperballistic, right, you're probably going to ask for that handout anyway. Now, to all
Sure,
prospects and existing clients, right? I mean, if you actually want to not take those calls, like we can detect a much higher level of frustration coupled with semantic profanities. You could have those calls go into a queue where they wait for an hour, right? You could
yeah.
very well do that, right?
Well, that's why all the calls that we played at the intro, which is just a lovely collection, by the way.
I love that.
You hear that most of them, when they hear the level of profanity that's there, say, "Okay, let me get you to somebody else," because, like you said,
Well, no,
we
no. I mean,
detect
those
that
calls
much.
are actually like all but the last one, which completely ballistic. We do exactly what we're supposed to, right?
Right,
Like the system works regardless of profanities, right?
right.
And that's like part of that armor, right? Like you just didn't have to have people doing it. Now, if you're going to be serious about profanities and like a different elevated emotional state, getting you either different agents, maybe more skilled ones, right? Or if you're going to like, maybe just stack rank people by their overall pleasantness, there's no reason you couldn't just push these people to the end of the queue, right? Now, for most businesses, someone very angry is probably a higher churn risk. So they probably want to put them to the front. I don't know. Not many companies actually action this in ways that we have signal for. So that's something that we're excited to explore in the future.
Oh, that seems pretty cool. All right. So in general, like the fact that more turns equals more tempered anger, which is nice to know. People are probably coming in hot, especially if they've been on hold and they have an issue. So that initial blast is probably worse, and the longer the call lasts. To your tennis analogy of those aces that come
Yeah.
across, if you could return one, then you got a higher chance of winning the point. So try and keep people on the phone. One, higher chance of resolution. Two, it calms them down just a bit.
Yeah.
And then three, like, obviously, people are largely unaware of the true capabilities of something in this level of application for modern conversational AI and generative AI. Like, it's only going to get better from here. It's only going to get more capable from here. So we should probably get used to finding another outlet for for venting frustration as opposed to the poor human service agents that we've unleashed on in the past, because their jobs are about to get
Yeah.
a
I mean,
lot
look,
better.
you should absolutely punish companies that provide you a bad service or a bad product by not returning your business to them in the future.
Sure.
Like the
And what is it? Something
oh,
like 65% of people will abandon a company completely if they have one bad experience. Like, it's wild to see the level
yeah,
of.
and that's why those companies and those contact center agents do their very best to tolerate you even when you're being absolute scum. But like, remember, the agent is not at fault. They're just
Right.
there trying to help you, right? You're probably going to get further by being nice, right? And I think a lot of people are just in either they can't calm themselves down and re-engage basic humanity, right?
Right.
Or they think that they will get a better outcome, a better refund, a higher incentive to stay with the contract or something like that. And to those people, well, goddamn, like, do you have nothing better to do?
Do you have nothing better to do? And for companies out there, don't enable that sort of behavior. It doesn't help anybody in the long run. The squeaky wheel should not always get the grease.
Yeah.
No, good stuff, Nicola. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Happy Halloween as we head into that season. And I'm sure we'll do another a retail focused topic as we approach that peak holiday season.
Absolutely. We have
Because
a
it's
dashboard and our retail clients tend to really, really take over in call volume this time of year. So yeah,
oh, we should
course.
pull out some fun little interactions from that and see what kind of trends we can detect and what our bots are picking up within the industry. I always like to find out how many people
Yep.
are thanking robots more and more. It's just
Yep.
to me that's the big tell. Cool. Appreciate your time, Nicola. And we'll talk with you soon and hope to see you all next week. Have a good one.
Thank you, Damien.